Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of StreamTime Sports. My name is Krista, and I'm the community lead, and this week our CEO, Nick Meacham, is on a well-deserved holiday. Instead, I'm joined by our technology editor, Steve McCaskill. Now, Steve, I like to, refer to Nick and I as Michael and Scotty, me being Scotty, Nick, the CEO, being Michael. Internally, within the walls of Sports Pro, you're affectionately known as the Sesh. If I continue up with the mid-90s Bulls references, surely that would make you our Dennis Rodman.
Oof, don't know how I feel about that. Also, congratulations on the first ever exterior use of the term sesh. All I can say is that I've not been on it so much that I'm looking for private audiences with the leader of North Korea just yet.
Well, you know what? If we're thinking about crazy blonde hair or crazy haircuts in general, I'm going to have a little sneak preview for everybody, Steve, because everyone knows once we get to September, there's going to be a lot of references to the Cincinnati Bengals. And speaking of blonde hair, everyone go out. If you're not familiar with the NFL, my man Joe Burrow's come in with a nice blonde buzzed haircut. He's gone from Joe Burrow to Joe Shiesty to now Slim Shiesty for his close appearance to Eminem from back in the day. Have you seen the new Joe Burrow haircut?
So I'm probably the opposite of most people in that I do actually shut down during the NFL offseason. I have so much else to follow that it's time for other sport. And I know the NFL will be very, very unhappy to hear that I'm not following the league year round as a year round product. But if it's not the draft, if it's not the actual regular season, I'm not really as into it unless there's a holdout. So no, I haven't actually seen Joe Burrow's Eminem impression.
You should. He looks just splendid. But, fantasy draft season's not long away from now, Steve. We'll have the draft in the office relatively soon. Now, I will say, Steve, though, you talked about there's all these other things going on in the summer. And today we're going to be talking quite a bit about the Olympics. Now, I sort of said, admittedly, Steve, on previous podcasts, the Olympics hasn't always been my thing. Like, I'll watch some of the basketball. I'll watch the 100-meter dash because it is fun to see how fast a human being can run. But up until I came to the office on Tuesday, I'd yet to actually watch any of the live content, Steve. But I will say the horse Mopsy, who is now gaining a lot of traction, also known as the Rave Horse for the freestyle equestrian, Steve. Have you seen the Rave Horse Mopsy doing its freestyle dance?
I've heard about it. We have a few equestrian fans in the office. Again, my claim to fame is I follow everything, but dressage and equestrian not really my bag. But I have heard about Rave Horse, and I have heard about the British horse called Jaeger Bomb. So maybe I am missing out by not partaking in that particular spectacle.
So what events have you been watching so far, Steve? So for everyone that's wondering, we're about almost a week in. What events have you been following?
Pretty much a little bit of everything. So even though it's like equestrian, I have been watching the show jumping, which has been, I think that's actually quite a good spectator sport. That gets very tense. I've been following, a lot of swimming. I think Leon Marchand in the pool has been the star of the games so far. The rugby sevens, big rugby fan, so I followed that tournament closely. I've been seeing, a few of the British medal hopes. There's not been too many Swiss medal hopes this time, or at least they have been in the British events. So there was a silver in the women's triathlon yesterday, which triathlon's a great sport. And you can definitely see why that's got some commercial backing with PTO, etc. I think that's such a great package and really exciting. And it's always one of the highlights of my games. But then, in the next couple of days, I think tomorrow my attention is going to switch to the athletics, which it for me is the Olympic sport. That's the one I follow more than anything else. That's what above all else, that's what the Olympics means to me. Although I'll be keeping a keen eye on the track. Track cycling is also quite good. So yeah, pretty much everything, I think I'd say.
The other one I mentioned that I've seen, so I want to be really clear, like I've watched almost no live Olympics, but I'm watching it via social media. So the things that social media picks up as interesting probably aren't what traditional broadcasters find interesting. The South Korean pistol shooter, the record-breaking pistol shooter, like some of the memes and things going around there are just excellent. Her whole stance, the way she stands, like she just looks like an absolute badass out there.
That I have seen, and it's interesting you're saying you're consuming it via social media because this has felt like a bit of a breakthrough games in that regard. There's this constant talk about how the Olympics can appeal to younger audiences, but we've seen quite a few things break out on TikTok and Instagram, and that's certainly one of them. And that was definitely one of the things discussed in the office by our younger colleagues this week.
Well, Before we dive into things, I'm just going to go on a little off piece. Like, one of the things I have found interesting, Steve, because Nick and I have talked quite a bit about our love for YouTube. I noticed it when the Olympics first started because the soccer, football, depending on where you're from, actually, I think started before the opening ceremonies. And I'm so used to just jumping onto YouTube to catch highlights for things, whether that's me being American and catching the Cincinnati Reds from the night before, or NBA highlights, or when UEFA's Champions League, Europa League's back in action, you just catch the games the next morning. I don't know if it's just because it's being geo-blocked within the UK because of potential broadcast deals with the BBC, but I've actually been really kind of underwhelmed with how much stuff is actually on YouTube. I've been trying to go watch highlights of the US men's soccer games, trying to find highlights of the US men's basketball games. They don't exist, Steve. Like, if you go on YouTube, you can't find them. And I find that a bit odd that there's not more use of YouTube. There is some stuff on BBC's YouTube channels, but not necessarily what I'm looking for. So, Steve, I don't know if that has to do with some of the broadcast deals that are in place, or if it's perhaps a missed opportunity, because I know they want to drive me to BBC or they want to drive me to the Olympics app, but I already have enough sports apps. I don't really want to download another app just to see highlights of things. I feel like it's been a bit of a missed opportunity. I don't know what you've noticed on your YouTube algorithms, but I'm struggling to find some things, Steve, and I think that's a missed opportunity.
I think it could be perceived as that. I think basically every sports broadcaster, every sports property probably does need to have a YouTube strategy. And again, I'm a bit like you. The first, if I want near live clip, I go on Twitter or X. If I want highlights, I go on YouTube. That's effectively my aggregator for all this digital stuff. I think with the Olympics are perhaps an interesting case because in most countries, they'll be partnering with a pretty famous broadcaster. And in Europe, I would say that probably lots of people will have their national broadcaster's app if they're interested in this kind of content. So, the BBC Sport website, BBC Sport app is pretty popular, right? And all the same with NBC in the US, for example. The broadcasters have access to these highlights, and I think they can choose to do it as they see fit. If the IOC aren't doing it centrally, that's because they're trying to protect their broadcast contracts. Now, where it gets a little bit complicated in terms of who has those digital rights. So, again, to use the UK example, the right to share between Warner Brothers Discovery, so Eurosports and Discovery Plus and Max, and well, not Max in the UK, but Max in other countries, and the BBC. The BBC is allowed to show that's about 200 hours or something like that, and it's allowed to show 2 concurrent streams. So it could all come down to when they're allowed to show those highlights on those platforms. So the BBC A wants people to watch on theirs, B may not be able to, and then if you're looking at Discovery Plus, they want you to sign up for a subscription. So I think the overall attitude has probably been, look, the people we're trying to reach beyond the broadcast deal are probably on TikTok and Instagram. They're probably not on YouTube in this instance. And I think that's probably what it is. So it remains to be seen whether that's going to be viable in the long term. I don't think anyone can ignore YouTube, but that would be my logical explanation for it.
Yeah, it's just old dog and new tricks, Steve. YouTube's my jam. That's how I get down. But moving on to kind of some of the things we want to talk about, we want to talk a little bit starting off with the actual broadcast side of things. And you mentioned NBC, and that's where we'll start because my understanding is when you start breaking down the TV revenue, NBC is by far the significantly largest partner that the Olympics has. And I know there's been some disappointment over the previous Olympics, and we've talked about, Nick and I, what potential, the time zones have had on that. But this Olympics, early days, seems like things are relatively positive. What have been your initial reactions to what you've seen from the coverage from an American perspective with what NBC is doing?
I'll tackle this question diplomatically in terms of I'll probably handle how successful it's been in the US and maybe what I think of the coverage at the end. Look, there's no escaping the fact the last few years have not been kind to, the last few Olympics have not been kind to NBC. It pays a lot of money. It pays, I think it's, the current deal is about it's 7.65 billion until Brisbane 2032. It's been the Olympic broadcaster for years. It's the IOC's single biggest contract for anything is with NBC. Now it needs to make money on that, right? So if you're having a games that's in a bad time zone where there's geopolitical factors that might limit its appeal, COVID in Tokyo, I think definitely dampened people's enthusiasms for those games. That's going to be hard for a broadcaster. Whereas London 2012, established sporting nation, not a bad time zone, 5 hours. Rio, pretty close to the US West Coast. Those are the money games for NBC. And this one, again, it's not in NBC's ideal time zone, but 6 hours, that's surmountable. That's fine. And the early signs are that NBC is having a really good games. It's doing well from a commercial perspective. It's doing ratings well. It's doing, I think, it's more than 32 million viewers watched the opening ceremony for this year. Although there is some, I think it is combining figures from the different time slots for that, to be fair. But at the end of the day, that's still 32 million. That's really good. There's advertiser interest. People are still enthusiastic about the Olympics. Now, the other thing from NBC's perspective is they're now using the Olympics as a way to shift Peacock subscriptions. Now, that's kind of changed its approach to it. The issue I've had, and this is an approach that many people have had in the US, is if it is a time zone problematic games, NBC won't show certain events live. They'll shift them into prime time so that they can maximize that audience. And lots of people are fed up with this because there's often been no legal way to watch these events live in a digital. It's not like in the 70s or 80s where you could easily avoid the results and watch ads live. People can know this instantly in the digital era. So there was some frustration with that. With Peacock, you pay your subscription, you can watch anything you want whenever you want. Now, that's something that we've been used to in Europe for a few years now. I think London 2012 was the first games that BBC showed in its entirety. Vancouver before that. BBC. This was a weird situation. In fact, BBC showed many streams from Vancouver, but not everything. You had to go into a special Eurovision website to access that. So we're used to that. I think Americans get used to it. The figures on Peacock have been really good, and that's another way for them to monetize it. If NBC can hang on to those subscribers when the games leave town, that's fantastic. So our man on the ground, Sam Karp, was speaking to NBC only yesterday with the head of Olympics, and they said that the viewership rebound was a relief. And the good news is that there's quite a run of really good games for NBC now. It's got, obviously, the next summer games are in LA, so that's going to be, that's going to be ridiculous in terms of interest and viewership. Next winter games from Milan Cortina in 2026. You've got a Winter Olympics in the French Alps, got Winter Olympics in Salt Lake, summer games in Brisbane. So, strength to strength, and can combine with the social stuff we were talking about earlier. Maybe this is what, it's a shot in the arm for the Olympic movement in terms of interest.
Well, it's interesting you talk about the social media side of things. One of the other things that's been noted that NBC's done is working with, talent, celebrities. They've got Snoop Dogg, Peyton Manning, Kevin Hart, and, I'm reading here, they've had 27 different creators on the ground using TikTok, Overtime, Snapchat, all these different social platforms. Admittedly, just how my algorithm works, Snoop Dogg is the one that keeps popping up all over the place. But we have seen similar strategies with this in terms of what Amazon's been doing with their NFL strategy, trying to bring in different personalities. So that does seem to make a lot of sense of what you're saying. And I think the last bit of the article goes on to say that the Olympics has $500 million coming in with first-time partners, which they're saying from, a sponsor perspective, that's their highest advertising revenue ever for an Olympics. So it does seem like in general, that's a pretty positive result for them.
Yeah, well, look, if you can't show the events live, if you are putting a lot of stock in this primetime presentation, you need to make it entertainment, right? And so getting the likes of Snoop Dogg, Kelly Clarkson, Peyton Manning on board to widen that appeal is a smart move. Whether that, I guess, having that primetime presentation in a world where everyone was able to watch everything live is going to persist as behaviors change remains to be seen. But it makes perfect sense from NBC, the IOC, and others. They've got creator programs. They're trying to tap into influencers, that working with people. Perhaps, Chris, I know you're younger than me, but people we've never heard of before. To try and make content to appeal to those, to those audiences that the IOC want to reach. So it makes sense. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but I think for me it illustrates the concept of choice. So if you really like Olympic sport, get Peacock. If you really like the Olympics, you want to dip in and out, you want to see the key events, you want to see Snoop Dogg chatting to the families, which is what he's been doing quite a bit. He loves the dressage as well. You stick with the primetime presentation, have a great evening's entertainment, and treat the Olympics that way. But yeah, it just seems really positive from NBC. Again, the coverage, like I said, is not always to my taste. We haven't even talked about Gold Zone yet, which is your friend of mine, Scott Hansen, taking you to every all the key medal events, and from a US perspective, that's been a new way to approach it, and it's kind of changing the way that people in the US are consuming the Olympics. Possibly, we're going to shift away from everything it's doing right now.
Well, for reference to those who are not familiar with Scott Hansen, he's the host of NFL Red Zone, which I will argue with anybody is the greatest single sporting production that exists in all of sports. I just love it, Steve. As a fantasy football guy, like just having that on in the background, watching the infamous Octobox kickoff with 8 games of nonstop commercial free football is just it's incredible. So I love the idea from an Olympics perspective. A whip around because you never know when a final race is coming up or you've got to switch your streams just to have Scott Hansen, who's clearly going to be someone that's well versed at being able to switch back and forth all those different things. It does seem like an incredible way to take rights you already have access to and packaging them up and distributing them in a completely different way.
Maybe next time we do a draft, we can do productions.
Ooh, yeah, I like that idea. Well, NFL draft season's coming up, so I need to mock that up as to what that'll be for this year. But if we flip sides of the pond, Steve, a little bit over from a European side of things, looking at some different things with BBC, Eurosport, Discovery, who you mentioned a little bit, how have you found things are going from that side of things?
I think there's still a lot of people getting used to the idea that the Olympics aren't always going to be on free-to-air TV in Europe. The situation historically has depended where there's been legislation that has guaranteed the Olympics need to be on free-to-air. So in the UK, there is that legislation, but it doesn't dictate that all of the Olympics must be on it. And so people have got used to being able to watch whatever event they want in the last decade. And now that's been sort of taken away from them without paying a subscription. I think people are struggling with that a little bit. There's definitely greater awareness that the games were Discovery Plus this time. I think in Tokyo, it was quite a shock to the system for a lot of people that knew that they needed a subscription for now. So, Eurosport is well versed in a lot of these Olympic sports. It covers them. It covers their seasons basically. So you've got experts talking about your sport. You can watch every event. In the UK, the production's been enhanced greatly by the arrival of TNT Sports, WBD Fold. So, in my opinion, the coverage has been better. I think there's been some really, there's been an infusion of on-screen talent. Obviously, for Eurosport, it's a home games in Paris. They, a lot of their operations are in Paris, and they're actually able to be there. So that's been a boon. So from a coverage perspective, got no issue with Eurosport. Technical enhancements haven't been quite there. I still have issues with Discovery Plus as a stream product for sports. I don't know I know it's got some sports specific features, but I find it very difficult to navigate and discover events. But they have alerts alerting you to major finals. You can go back and see major events. So, for example, in the football, you can go back to the goals. The public service broadcasters now, under Warner Brothers Discovery's last deal, they had to negotiate directly with WBD. Now, in this new deal, they've been the rights been negotiated as part of the EBU, so Eurovision Sport, and so they're now direct partners of the IOC effectively again. Their contract allows them, it's basically, I think it's about 200 hours of coverage over the Olympics across two streams. I think that's correct. And so the public service broadcasters are faced with challenges about which events to cover. And there's so much going on. What do you do? And so most have operated, they've got a system of like a curated feed, which has some events live, some events as live, and then often with a secondary feed that will show events in full that are of interest, but you can't really dip in and out of. So, for example, swimming finals, you can go from one swimming final to another. It's not going to work for a full hockey match or a full basketball match. So, in the UK, there's a main feed on BBC, and then there's a secondary feed on digital TV and via streaming. In Ireland, I think the Olympics have taken over the RTE's news channel. So, I think there's some frustration, people getting used to it. In a weird way, it's kind of emphasizing the value of public service broadcasters for a lot of people, particularly in the UK, where the license fee is a political topic, and people are missing the good old days where everything was on BBC, and perhaps understanding why it needs to be properly funded. So no complaints on the coverage. I think the BBC's done quite a good job in trying to manage that. It's not an easy task at all. So I think the coverage is good. The coverage is there. I just think perhaps discoverability and awareness still needs to be worked on.
So one of the things Nick and I did a podcast a few weeks back talking about the role of major events. We've just finished up Wimbledon, we've finished up the Euros, now we're coming into the Olympics, and we talked about these events that take place. Some of them are annual, some of them are every 4 years. The role of the broadcast partners that they choose and the whole debate between revenue versus reach. Now we've talked about NBC being, a free to air broadcaster. How important do you think it is for the Olympics in terms of how they view that balance between reach versus revenue? Should they be entertaining more pay TV offers? Is that actually not in their best interest? I think even when you think about their tops program with the sponsors in terms of those eyeballs, do you think it's important that they try to maintain, I suppose, more emphasis on free to air as opposed to going to perhaps what might short term look more lucrative with pay TV?
Ultimately, the IOC is a non-profit organization. It's got a sporting mission. Now, if it wants to achieve those goals, the vision, it needs to be as widely available as possible. Otherwise, what's the point? I know it has lots of programs, it promotes sports, it feeds a lot of money through to the international federations and the national organizing committees, etc., etc. But if your games aren't widely available, they're not being watched, what's the point? Especially given there's this almost existential battle about the future of the games and what form it's going to take to attracting young audiences. Now, on the other hand, I think this is perhaps similar to like a FIFA or UEFA. I think that they do know that. I think they do value free-to-air coverage. They know that that's what makes their events big. But I think they quite like the idea of pay TV driving up the value of those rights. So if you've got legislation that says the Olympic Games must be on free-to-air TV, well, that's going to mean that pay TV is not going to bid for it. And that means the free-to-air broadcasters aren't going to pay as much. So I think they would like basically a system where everyone's free to compete, but games ultimately end up on free-to-air TV. I think in the US, it's very straightforward because there isn't really that distinction, and particularly in a streaming world, it's becoming a bit more. The lines are blurring between over-the-air, cable, digital distribution. So I think it's still going to be that case. If anything, the Olympics is becoming a streaming product in the US. In Europe, it's a little bit different. It's a much more fragmented landscape. I think the IOC is probably quite happy at dealing with Eurovision, which represents the European broadcasters, and it's probably quite happy with dealing with a single pay TV broadcaster. And at the end of the day, it's not, this isn't the case of the Olympics going to Sky Sports or Canal Plus or Movistar or something like that. It's going to Eurosport, which is quite ubiquitous in most European countries. It's a really weird. It's a pay TV channel, but it's widely available, and I think that they quite like that. They know they do the Olympic sports justice. Look, it needs revenue, but the Olympics would die if it left free to air TV. There's no two ways about it. People, talk about making the Olympics a cultural event. People are interested in the Olympics. If they're not interested in sport, it's got a little bit of Wimbledon effect to it, and it's a tricky one. I do appreciate the commercial sensitivity of it, but you've got to step back and decide what's your ultimate goal here.
So you're not going to be able to come on a StreamTime podcast, Steve, with the job title as technology editor and not talk about a little bit of tech. So we talked a little bit about the performance side, how we're receiving things, numbers, monetization, but flipping it over to the tech side, this is obviously an incredibly massive event, takes years of planning. It's not like a football match where everything is housed within a single stadium. It's not even like, Formula One race or a golf match where we might say, oh, there's a big course or a big track. I mean, this is quite literally taking place all over Paris, and the surfing is taking quite literally all the way on the other side of the world in, French Polynesia. So, maybe Steve, we can start off a little bit, just maybe explain a little bit kind of the relationship. We keep talking about the IOC, but maybe bringing in like where OBS fits within all this as well.
Yeah. Just before I get into that, I don't know if you've seen NBC's surfing correspondent out there, and he's having a great time. And he's got a very certain way of delivery that people are saying, I don't know if this is real or if it's a Saturday Night Live sketch. So I'd urge you to check that out.
I saw it on my TikTok feed, but I didn't actually. I think I scrolled too fast, but I'm aware of what you're talking about. But now you've mentioned it, I'm going to go find it again.
Yeah, it's worth your time. Yeah, look, the Modern Olympics is such a complex event. Like you think about sports IT projects, and you think, which ones rely on. I mean, the Olympics just wouldn't function. It manages everything from accreditation to management software to security to the results service to point of sale terminals. it's so vast, and it's almost, I mean, for me, it's almost unimaginable, and it's based in a dedicated facility. I don't know where it is. They're probably not saying it. I went to the one in London 2012, and I'm still not sure if I'm allowed to say where it was. So, but they let me in. So there is that. And there's about ATOS is the main integrator. So it's the worldwide IT partner for the IOC. It manages about 15 other vendors. Some are top partners, some are local suppliers. So Orange, the French telco, is managing all the connectivity. There's other integrators. Cisco is providing some networking equipment. So it will manage all of those providers from the TOC. Omega is providing the timing and scoring, which is the original technology for the Olympics. We've seen it go from stopwatches to photo finishes to now AI for judging. So that's quite an important area. And one thing that's changed in recent years is that there needs to be fewer people on site. So they've got remote testing, remote IT environments back in Spain. And all of this powers everything. So Orange are providing connectivity to the IBC, the International Broadcast Center, which is how we get to watch all these games. It's 250,000 hours of testing has gone into this. And we saw the other week with the global outage caused by CrowdStrike that you see what happens when something goes down. And I think some power systems were affected. It wasn't catastrophic for them, but you see what happens. You can't travel anywhere. You can't do anything. This is really important stuff. And the broadcast element, again, there's Orange, there's fiber going to the IBC. It's helping feed the broadcasters. OBS is the centralized broadcaster. So it provides the pictures for all of the international partners. I know some have their own cameras on the ground, but it'll mostly be this feed you're watching. And the whole point is, if you have, let's say, for example, I think the last Olympics where it was the pictures were mainly provided by the host broadcaster was Seoul '88, and you're going to get a national narrative, right? You're going to focus on the stories and the athletes from your country. You're not going to serve everyone equally. So since 1992, there's been independent host broadcaster. In 2001, Olympics established OBS, broadcasting services, and since Vancouver 2010, it's been the sole broadcaster. So London 2012 wasn't delivered by the BBC, it was delivered by OBS, et cetera, et cetera. Again, the narrative control is, that's a terrible phrase, but you know what I mean? Like being able to focus on more athletes than the national ones is one advantage. The other is that the IOC gains control over the tech roadmap, so it can roll out new technologies to enhance the games, whether that's 4K, 8K, which is being tested at these games, although you won't be able to watch it in 8K. Alibaba, another top partner, is basically using AI to merge multiple camera angles into a 3D reconstruction of major events. So, it's meant to be more engaging. It's been used, for example, in tries in Rugby 7. So when Antoine Dupont scored a one for France, you can see it almost like 360, almost Matrix style, I think is the best way to describe it, but a bit more advanced. The Matrix was captured literally by putting, I don't know how many different still photo cameras in a circle. I've seen it in one of those DVD special features, that's a throwback.
What's a DVD?
Exactly. And I think that's a really good way of explaining what might be unfamiliar concepts in sports. So it's been used in the diving to show the synchronization at different levels of the dive. So if you're watching the dive and you think, oh, that was a good dive, but why has this one got more than the other? You can see the technique and the synchronization at different stages almost instantly, because they're using something called edge computing, which processes the data as close as possible to the points of collection. So I think it's a really good way of just illustrating how sport works. We're going to get new camera angles because there's 5G networks. Again, it's all about the speed and the latency. So making sure that data is going over the network fast enough for it to be used in a broadcast. That was supposed to be used in the opening ceremony, but I didn't see too much of it, and I'm wondering if that was because the weather was affected. But it's being used in the sailing events, I believe, that cameras attached to the boards. It's like sailing kite surfing. I should really check that out. But that's an example of something that wouldn't be possible before, getting an athlete perspective, because you're relying on public networks, public wireless networks to get that across. If you get a private 5G network, you have that shot. So it's just a really innovative way of doing it. And then remote production. that's almost par for the course these days. Means you have fewer people on site, fewer resources required, which also helps the Olympic sustainability efforts and also makes it more affordable for national broadcasters to handle the games. So, yeah, I'm only sort of scratching the surface for what happens at Olympics from a tech perspective, but I guess that's probably the most public-facing ones that we'll be seeing.
Well, I'm glad to have someone with a European background because I would not have said orange. I'd have just been like orange. So it's nice to have someone with a little bit more culture than this Southern Ohio boy with a little bit of roots from Eastern Kentucky because, it definitely is not orange where I'm from. But you did mention one word there, Steve, that's kind of the big buzzword, and I'll talk about it because Sports Pro is going to have an AI themed week coming up at the beginning of September. We're going to be hosting our Sports Pro AI event in London at the Olympic Stadium, home of European champions West Ham United. Come on, you Irons. But Steve, with AI specifically, I know it kills you because, as a Man United fan, you're the second biggest United in the UK behind West Ham, home of the East London's finest. But I'm not even going to let you respond, Steve. You're just going to have to take it. But talking about AI specifically, you talked a little bit about sort of the integration, some of the things that are going in there, but it is the hot word. It is the buzz topic, at least from a sports tech perspective, even removing it. But within the Olympics, how important is that in terms of what they're doing? You mentioned a couple of, case studies of how they're using this, but how prevalent is it compared to perhaps other Olympics?
So I've built this. I'm sure there's others too. So I'm going to take complete ownership of it. The first AI Olympics. In terms of the AI technology has been used before, but it feels very front and center to everything that's being that the tech operation is trying to do. And the IOC itself is trying to position itself at the center of AI, as part of its mission, to position itself at the center of the conversations about AI in sport. It's published something called the Olympic AI Agenda, which has how it believes AI is going to transform sport and what needs to be done by various stakeholders. So it's trying to steer that conversation. In terms of what's being done at these Olympics, yes, you've got the AI cameras. A lot of the graphics that will be used are the result of AI, in terms of data analysis. Omega is using AI for judging purposes, and Intel is a top partner. They're working with IC on things like talent identification. They're trying an AI-powered end-to-end 8K production workflow that could be used for future games. All of the venues at Paris 2024 have been turned into digital twins. That's basically a AI-generated, accurate digital representation of a physical space. So you can do that to simulate changes like what happens if we close this exit to traffic flow within the stadium, or even actual traffic, like what's the impact of this going to be on a traffic light changes. And you can inform things like smart signage. You can inform things like how many staff you need on a certain till. So that's the way it's been doing the games. And then also it's been using AI to help protect the athletes from abuse on social media. Because at the end of the day, this should be the peak of anyone's career, competing at Olympic Games. You should be able to enjoy it. You should be able to, interact with your supporters and other people. And for sports, a lot of these sports are individual sports. A lot of these athletes won't have central funding. They rely on their sponsors to fund their career. So they need to be on social media to help get the exposure they need. So that's what they're trying to do. It's part of a wider, I guess, education program. People should stop doing this online, full stop. But at least it's a way that perhaps this can be, the athlete can be prevented from seeing it and it can be reported appropriately. So, yeah, lots of, I guess, tangible use cases of AI. One of the things I will say is there's a lot of people, not just in sport, but in industry, say we're using AI. Oh, our process is intelligent. With just it's not really, or they might say it's Gen AI, but it's just AI. The Olympics, it's not just, I guess, a cycle of sport. It's also a cycle of tech within sport and the operation. And we're seeing that come to fruition now.
So one last thing, Steve, before we move on. The last time we had you on the StreamTime podcast, we talked about the return of NCAA and the role of video games in sports. We also saw very recently that the Olympics is now that they're going to be introducing esports as part of their broader mission. So I think that's also interesting. We talked about some of the social media growth and some of the things you're doing with celebrities to contact new demographics, but now they're talking about introducing esports. So what's your reaction to that?
I mean, it's something that's been talked about for a while. I think the wider conversation has been about whether esports are included as part of the Olympic program themselves. And I think that would be quite controversial. Particularly, you're trying to appeal to new audiences without upsetting the core audience. And what they've done is, in terms of trying to reach younger fans with the main Olympics, is through this social content by including sports like breaking and BMX and skateboarding. So the Olympic esports games will be, I think, they'll be held in 2025, and they'll be held in Saudi Arabia, and they'll be completely separate from the organizational and the financial model of the Olympic Games. So part of the Olympic movement, not part of the Olympics, I suppose is the best way of describing it. I think it just proved too complicated because of those controversies, and also things like doping would be quite hard. In terms of finding a international federation would be hard because there's so many different ones. There isn't like the World Esports Association. You've got like ESL, Major League Gaming. You've got the series operated by the publishers themselves. So it's quite a fragmented landscape. So again, IOC wants to be, I guess, at the center of this. It wants to help drive that conversation, be part of it. The fact that Saudi Arabia is telling, because that country is trying to position itself as a hub for esports. I guess it's much easier to do than traditional sports because of the fan bases. So yeah, I guess it's bringing esports under the umbrella. It like so many other ones, sport recognizes that esports is going to be a bigger thing, and it needs to be a part of it. But at least for the foreseeable future, it's not going to be part of the Olympic Games themselves.
And speaking of video games in the Olympics, I hear you have a bit of a grievance with something that may be taking place right now where those two things intersect.
So I love Olympic video games. They're not the most sophisticated. They're not the best, and there's only some things you can do. But you think about the classic athletics games like Daley Thompson's decathlon, international track and field, and we've had a slew of licensed ones. Sydney 2000 was the first I played. It's very primitive. London 2012 was great. I still play that with my brother, and we have Mario and
What
Sonic.
system is that on?
It's a PlayStation 3, and
Ooh.
yeah, it's and also it's a fun time of London 2012, which I miss very dearly. But there's also been the Mario and Sonic Olympic Games, which are also great fun. But there's no official video game for this Olympics, well, at least not a traditional one. So Sega had the license. They published both the simulation game and the Mario and Sonic, working with Nintendo. The suggestion by a report in Eurogamer this week is that it decided to not renew that licensing agreement because they wanted to pursue opportunities in areas like NFTs and esports, which, if that means I'm not getting a video game, I'm not very happy about. The only official Olympic video game is basically a mobile game, which is casual, free to play, fun about microtransactions. It's not one from the Olympic video game experience. Basically, a lot of my video game collection is officially licensed games or games based on events that allow me to recreate those events, which I know sounds like a weird thing to do, but why else have I got a copy of Euro 2008 on my shelf? So I feel like I'm being denied that. I'm not sure it's my the way to go, but let's be honest, maybe it's just not the seller it once was.
Maybe not, Steve. Maybe not. Maybe it's just you and I that like video games. But some really exciting news just came through our desk here recently, Steve, as you were giving that last answer. Sam Karp, our features editor, is actually out in Paris at the moment for the 2024 Paris Olympics, and he just had the opportunity to interview Gary Zenkel, who's the president of NBC's Olympics coverage since 2005. So actually, to end this episode, we're going to hand things over to Sam speaking with Gary, so that way we can get a little more insights based on some of the conversation that Steve and I had earlier in this podcast. So we'll hand things over to Steve, and thank you everybody for listening to this portion of the episode.
Gary, thanks very much for joining me and hosting me here at the NBC studios in Paris. Why don't we just start off talking about your reflections on the games so far? How have they been going from an NBC perspective?
I will try to manage my enthusiasm and excitement because we're 4 days in, so there's a way to go. But it's gone tremendously well. The planning phase was. It's a complicated Olympics spread throughout the city. We have created a complicated structure with much of our production back in Stamford. So we have production happening from these two locations, several thousand miles apart. So that had some, and always will have some complexity to it. But the games have been really smooth in the lead up. And then, of course, we're really excited about the audience figures that we have seen over the last 4 days. So excitement is high. It feels great that the American audience, and I won't speak for the rest of the world, my hunch is that the Olympics is doing great around the world, but the American audience has truly reassembled for these games after a reasonably difficult period through the COVID games of 21 and 22.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned some of the viewership numbers there. I think I saw the other day over 30 million over the opening weekend total audience delivery. What are you attributing that to? I guess is it to do with the time zone? Is it the fact that this is kind of the first Summer Olympics we've had since 2016, really, where it's back in its full glory? Is it a combination of a few of those things?
It's and we will certainly try to figure this out when we get home and we do some audience research. But I think it's a combination of many factors. First and foremost, environmentally, as I said before, the Olympics has reopened its doors. Fans are back in the seats. Families are back in the stands watching their kids and loved ones. And I think, and NBC and other broadcasters, again, have the ability to spread throughout the city and use and incorporate this incredible city into the storytelling, which has always been an important part of how NBC and probably other broadcasters have presented the Olympics. In addition to that, this Olympics has attracted a tremendous amount of interest. If you're watching gymnastics either last night or a few nights ago, there's a lot of celebrity involved. The social noise is at an all-time high, as reported to us by the platforms that we all work with. And then, of course, always something that certainly helps with interest is the performance of the U.S. team. Has probably exceeded expectations so far. Again, it's early, but there's just tremendous storylines that have played out so far over the course of 4 days and have set up a great next 12 or 13 days.
As you were saying there, a few things contributing to that rise in viewership. Any sports in particular that you're seeing performing well over the course of the opening days? We've seen basketball, we've had the gymnastics last night. We're speaking in the morning after Simone Biles. And our teammates won gold. We've had some of the more urban sports as well. Yeah, what are you kind of seeing driving audiences?
You mentioned Simone Biles, gymnastics, and the men's team winning bronze after a long run without a medal. Tremendously passionate group of young men from the U.S. was magical for I think for the audience and for us. They're just a tremendous performance, tremendous personality. And then, of course, Simone Biles and the U.S. women's team winning gold again as a team last night, has no doubt galvanized the American audience. Swimming continues, as it often and always is, has been a great sport, great performance, great U.S.-Australia rivalry that's playing itself out, among others. Some of the areas that are unexpected, we had a U.S. fencing final, 2 U.S. athletes. That was incredibly cool. Skateboarding with the men was great. And the U.S. Basketball, both men and women, the U.S.-Serbia men's game attracted a massive audience. In fact, beating in their first preliminary game, beating the Tokyo final, which was a U.S.-France final. There was a U.S. women's rugby medal round yesterday. They came from behind in the last few seconds to win a medal. It was extraordinary. And there's no doubt a lot of excitement around a sport that historically doesn't generate a ton of viewing interest, but has set us up well for certainly the future of that sport in the Olympics.
Yeah, definitely. I think I saw straight after that Michelle Kang had committed to investing a few $1 million in rugby on the back of it. So definitely some positive signs there for the development of that sport in the US. I just wanted to ask as well. Obviously, you referenced Tokyo and Beijing a little bit earlier. Has it been kind of, I guess, a bit of a relief to see the bounce back that we've had in Paris? Quite a few people were obviously drawing conclusions about, I suppose, the relevance of the Olympics on the back of those events. Has it kind of felt a little bit like maybe those conclusions were drawn a bit too soon?
Yes. It's a great relief. I've been doing this for a long time, and I am a true believer in the power and the magic of the Olympics for a number of reasons, but certainly to capture and assemble the interest and an audience in the United States. It was scary to see numbers, that had fallen as they had, but for me, not having fans in the stands and families and access again to for our crews and our commentators to be able to tell the stories of the city and the context of the games, I think was really undermining. The factor that also shifted, and it wasn't environmental like the impact of COVID, was the shifting behavior of the consumer, of the American consumer, and the way they consume media. And that accelerated with COVID, with people shifting certainly a decent amount of their media consumption time to streaming platforms and even YouTube and other shorter form social media platforms. And so the question was, even when you put the Olympics fully back together and you bring the families and you bring the spirit and you bring the world back, has the behavior shifted so much that bringing them back to a more traditional, let's come together around a singular program, would that happen? Well, if I had any lingering concern, it was, did the behavior shift so much during this period for so long a period of time? It's the first summer, post-COVID Summer Olympics, been 8 years. Was that going to have an impact? And so it is incredibly gratifying and somewhat relieving to see that the Olympic audience that we knew for the decades that we've been broadcasting and the decades that others have, was there. And they needed the pieces to be put back together again.
Yeah, definitely. And you kind of alluded to it there, but that audience is now watching the Olympics across more platforms than ever. One thing that you guys have obviously done this year, you're broadcasting basically every moment on Peacock, whereas I suppose in Tokyo and Beijing, the role of Peacock was maybe slightly smaller and there were some slight teething issues perhaps.
Yes.
Perhaps we can say. But does this feel like a real kind of coming of age moment for that platform?
Absolutely. And Tokyo was minutes after that platform launched as a platform.
Yeah.
And the Olympics is so complicated, with thousands of hours, 30 sports, multi-simultaneous streams. And then you're trying to navigate and guide the audience through and around that vast offering. It was difficult for Peacock to get launched as a platform and to build the interface necessary to support something as massive as the Olympics. Now we've got, we've had several years. We have incredibly talented technology and engineers and product folks. And they have spent essentially 2 years building the Olympic interface and building, the foundation to support the complexity of the Olympics. And yes, a bit of a coming of age. I think we will always improve upon and advance the product and the experience. But for today, there can't be a better platform for one to experience the Olympics than what Peacock is offering the American audience. Not a chance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and are you quite confident that obviously with this event will be driving a lot of people to Peacock, a lot of new subscribers, I imagine. What kind of measures are being put in place to ensure that, once these 17 days of action are over, that, there's enough there to keep them around?
Yeah. It's an excellent question. The Olympics is, again, is once again assembling the audience. For some, their platform is going to be a streaming platform. And the key is to make sure that they get a very good taste of what Peacock has to offer them outside of the Olympics while they're there. And so tremendous amount of time, programming time, how the experience of the Olympics and what the way that they're interacting with the platform relates to how they would continue to interact with the platform has been thoroughly thought through. And then offering and featuring programming that's going to appeal to that Olympic fan, which is a very broad, it's a giant swath of America, has been thoughtfully figured out. And we're very good at retention. And NBC streamed a American football playoff game in January. It was the most streamed event ever. And the retention for those who had signed up, just who came in for that football game, was very, very high.
Yeah, I was at the skateboarding the other day, and all of a sudden, quite a lot of fans started rushing towards one exit in the stands, and had a look over because there was a lot of clamour, and it was because Snoop Dogg was was making his way over. Obviously, he's among a number of kind of, non-traditional Olympic talent that you've enlisted for your coverage this year, and you're also working with some of the platforms like TikTok, Meta over time to have some of their creators reporting on the games as well. What's the thinking behind that? Why are you doing this?
Reaching the American audience today requires not just great marketing and promotion across our owned platforms, which have a lot of reach, but we also need to reach the American audience in places and with people and personalities that they connect to, that they are influenced by. So we have a huge creator program, which I think there are 27 different creators that will cycle through Paris, dispersed across the different social platforms. So that is certainly one strategy. And then in the case of Snoop, one, he has tremendous reach and influence and appeal. But two, he's an incredibly talented guy with an enormous passion for the Olympics. Really feels what I think those of us that spend most of our lives working on this feel, which is the power of the story of the Olympian. Somebody who is generally fairly relatable. They've worked tirelessly. They're talented, and they've taken advantage of that talent, and they've given every ounce of their time and effort into trying to be the best of the best. And, the story behind that, I think, is something that resonates with the audience. And Snoop, who I've gotten to know a little bit through this journey, feels that as much as anybody else. And he brings he brings humor, he's entertaining, but at the same time, he brings with it the emotion that I think people are drawn to about the Olympics. And so it's a combination of his influence. It's also part of Molly Solomon, who are executive producers, new playbook, which is to entertain and to, yes, play the stories out, cover the Olympics, but surprise and delight is sort of her mantra as well. And Snoop in the pool with Michael Phelps and in the stands with the Biles family, along with them and around Paris, among, as you say, some other of the folks that we brought to these games, has added an element to our presentation, which is different, and I think has really created some great moments.
Yeah, for sure. Were any of those changes kind of inspired a little bit by some of the dips that you had seen, and kind of a recognition maybe that people, aren't consuming the Olympics the way that maybe you and I did when we were growing up, and not just having that one main network to watch it all on. You can reach people across all these various different platforms and through, various individuals who have their own platforms to promote it on.
Yeah, definitely. I think as I just said, you've got to reach beyond the four corners, or whatever that the appropriate metaphor is, of your owned platforms, and you've got to engage through those that are influencing the audience to create the feelings that you need to get people to watch. It's making them, care about, or first familiarize themselves with the athletes and then engage and make them care. That essentially is the formula to yield, what turns into a lot of time spent following these stories as they unfold. And in some cases, it will be on NBC or on Peacock. And in other cases, it'll be on Instagram. And either way, that's fine. We'd prefer they come over to NBC, but we want them to continue to engage. We want to be relevant. We want the next generation of viewers who may be short form viewers today, but will evolve into longer form viewers. Who knows? We don't know where the world goes. Part of that formula is to again connect with those that they connect with every day.
Yeah, and I guess captivating that younger audience is also something that the IOC is trying to do itself, right? It's a similar challenge that they're facing, and what they've done with this games, I guess, is they've got this urban part, they've got some new sports, or a new sport in breaking, but a few others that debuted in Tokyo, but are now that fans can see up close for the first time. What have you kind of made as one of the biggest benefactors of the Olympic Games, of kind of the efforts that are ongoing to modernise the games and make sure they are relevant to that next generation?
Yes, definitely. So it's a combination of they have continually evolved the program, and so the introduction of the sports, some of them that you mentioned, breaking, of course, is brand new. We'll get a taste for that at the end of the second week of the games. So that has been very beneficial. And then, they've taken other steps. We with them and some of the other broadcasters have recognized how important it is that the athletes have an opportunity to connect with their audiences. And so where there were greater restrictions on the ability of an athlete to push out some of their own social media, we've all gotten ourselves comfortable with opening that door for those athletes. And then again, I mentioned our creator program. Let us bring in some very influential young folks, and let us allow them to circulate around the Olympics and tell the story of their experience or the athlete that they may meet or encounter either through working with us or circulating around the Olympics, and tell the story of that athlete through their voice. And I think those steps which we have taken and the IOC has taken with us is just another way to continue to ensure the relevance of the Olympics and then the engagement of the next generation. I think they've done a very good job of being willing to break down some of the older, more stricter rules.
I just wanted to ask as well, we're obviously here speaking at the Olympics. You've referenced the NFL already. Another major rights deal that NBC has just done is for the NBA for 11 years from 2025. I know we're sort of looking a long way into the future here, given that the Olympics deal runs until 2032. But I don't know whether you envisaged that deal may have an impact on your ability to continue with the Olympics beyond that. Is that even being thought about at this stage?
No, I think what that deal, to the extent, in an Olympic context or as it might relate to our desire or capacity to continue with the Olympics beyond our current contract, simply proves and validates that NBC and Comcast, our parent company, are committed and fully invested in sports as a critical part of the programming mix that is on NBC Universal, is on Peacock, and Comcast as the largest distributor of video in the United States is important to the ecosystem. So I, as the Olympic person, am encouraged that NBC and Comcast place that long-term bet on the NBA. I think that only gives me more confidence that when it is time to talk to the IOC about extending those rights, that we'll be absolutely at that table.
Great, awesome. And just before I let you go, Gary, because I'm conscious I've taken up a lot of your time.
That's okay.
I just wanted to ask, we're kind of not sure exactly how many days are left of the Olympics, maybe about 10 days, I think, possibly.
More.
Well, there you go. What's going to represent success by the time we reach that closing ceremony for NBC? I mean, I saw overnight as well that ad sales are through the roof, highest ever for an Olympics for NBC. Obviously, viewership, as we've spoken about, has really bounced bounced back. Is that what you're looking at, or are there kind of other metrics that you're using as well?
Well, those are certainly key metrics. Audience continues to sort of hold the cruising altitude that it has established in these first 4 days. Yes, we have achieved great success on the ad sales side. We though have other metrics that also are important to us. The company as a whole benefits enormously from the games. The Today Show is a critical program of NBC News, and they're here broadcasting every morning, as they have been for as far back as I can remember. And so the benefits to those broadcasts and building and continuing to establish and reestablish those audiences. Nightly news, we have all of our own television stations are here benefiting from our positioning as the broadcaster to enhance their own local coverage of the games. So there are various what we call halo effects. And generally when those couple of metrics you talked about, which is just the interest continues, they will undoubtedly be beneficiaries. And of course, Peacock, as we've discussed before, it's that's a platform that is sort of also hitting its stride, or has, and that continuing as we exit Paris on the back of again, with the Olympics contributing to continuing to accelerate its success. Is another metric. And then, we have 3,000 people working on these games, and then a company in every part of NBC Universal and many parts of Comcast are devoted and engaged in our success, and continuing to for that group of staff to feel as excited as I think we all do today. Which again, there's no reason why that isn't going to continue. So there are many benefits to a successful Olympics, and I expect what we're feeling today to continue for those next 10 or 11 days, and the glow coming out of this will be extraordinary.
Well, yeah, let's hope so. Gary, thank you so much again for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you for today.
Now, before you go, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate and review, and just let me know what you think on social. You can find me on most social platforms as SportsProNick. And please do spread the word of the podcast. There's no better way of marketing than word of mouth, whether that be in person or on social media. And if you don't like what you've heard, or you think we should be doing more or less of something, then reach out and let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Streamtimers. Until next time.